the British soldier. All around the globe you'll find him, from Gibraltar to Hong Kong. Everywhere he stands against the threatening years, staunch symbol of our common will to order.
L'Empire britannique, le plus grand empire de toute l'histoire de l'humanité. Pendant plus de 300 ans, la Grande-Bretagne a dominé le monde, grâce à ses armées, ses conquêtes et à ses banquiers qui n'eurent de cesse de vanter la puissance de sa monnaie, la livre sterling. Cependant, un jour, cette façade glorieuse commença à se fissurer. Un par un, les pays colonisés proclamèrent ou obtinrent leur indépendance, une tendance qu'aucune force n'aurait pu inverser. Voyant leurs richesses, leurs privilèges et leur empire s'évaporer, les élites britanniques commencèrent à chercher quel nouveau rôle elles pourraient jouer dans ce monde en pleine mutation. Elles choisirent le monde de la finance, un terrain de jeu qui leur était déjà familier. Ce film retrace l'histoire de la métamorphose de la puissance coloniale britannique en une puissance financière moderne et révèle en quoi cette métamorphose a façonné les structures actuelles du monde dans lequel nous vivons. Au zénith de l'Empire britannique, la City de Londres était le plus grand centre financier au monde.
The City of London was the kind of beating financial heart of the British Empire. The historians Kane and Hopkins call it the governor of the imperial engine. All these countries in the empire used to use the sterling currency, and the City of London was kind of the financier of this zone, not just inside the sterling zone, but outside the sterling zone as well.
Avec le déclin de l'Empire, la City a elle aussi commencé à perdre son rang.
One British Army truck is bombed, killing 2 soldiers and wounding 12. As rioting becomes daily more widespread on Cyprus, young people of high school age take an increasing part in the violence. Here, a group of girls are being dispersed after a rock-throwing battle with British military police.
Du fait du déclin de l'Empire, les intérêts commerciaux britanniques se trouvèrent menacés de toutes parts. En 1956, l'Égypte nationalise le canal de Suez.
A new Middle East crisis arises as President Nasser of Egypt tells a wildly cheering crowd in Alexandria that Egypt has seized the internationally owned Suez Canal. France and Britain issue a 12-hour ultimatum. Within hours of its expiration, Britain's warplanes are winging their way to Egypt, and its bombers attack 5 key cities, including Cairo.
Les États-Unis étaient opposés à cette opération et firent pression sur la Grande-Bretagne et la France afin qu'elles retirent leurs troupes.
There will be no United States involvement in these present hostilities. It is our hope and intent this matter will be brought before the United Nations General Assembly. There, the opinion of the world can be brought to bear in our quest for a just end to this tormenting problem.
La Grande-Bretagne en ressortit totalement humiliée. La crise du canal de Suez a amorcé la fin du rôle de la Grande-Bretagne comme l'une des superpuissances mondiales.
Following the crisis, there was a run on the sterling, on the UK pound. Some people suspect that the American government was encouraging this run on the UK pound.
Les acteurs financiers ayant retiré leurs fonds placés à Londres, une baisse considérable de la livre s'ensuivit. Afin de protéger la valeur de leur monnaie, les autorités imposèrent aux banques une limite sur leurs prêts internationaux.
They were not able to invest abroad, and obviously they were unhappy. And we don't know exactly the context, but it's very clear that the banks or their representative made a representation to the Bank of England, which in itself was dominated by representatives from the banking industry. It seems that they have reached an agreement which was never written, that if the banks intermediated between two non-residents in a foreign currency, in that case the dollar, then this particular intermediation, this particular deal will not be considered by the Bank of England under its own jurisdiction.
Les banques ont alors commencé à créer un marché pour les dollars à Londres, connu sous le nom de marché des euro-dollars de Londres, afin de différencier ces activités sur l'euro-market de ses activités bancaires internes. Les banques ont créé deux systèmes de comptes. La Banque d'Angleterre, régulatrice du marché interne, a déclaré que les comptes de l'Euromarket de Londres n'opéraient pas en fait à Londres, ils étaient ailleurs, se déchargeant ainsi de toute responsabilité quant à leur supervision.
It's about providing a legal space in which you pretend activity is taking place. And the importance of that is that you pretend it's not taking place in the economy where it really is taking place. So you're taking activity from the place where it's regulated and taxed and pretending that it's happening elsewhere. Now where doesn't really matter, it's just elsewhere.
Lorsque les banques américaines ont réalisé que Londres offrait la possibilité d'éviter la réglementation américaine, elles ont transféré leurs opérations internationales à la City. Au moment même où les banques américaines transféraient leurs transactions internationales à Londres, une autre sorte d'archipel financier a commencé à émerger. Très loin de Londres, dans les juridictions britanniques d'outre-mer, ces restes d'un empire colonial déchu.
Back in the 60s, the Cayman Islands was a complete backwater. The stories go that mosquitoes were so thick in the air sometimes they were enough to suffocate cows. That's a legend that you hear about the Cayman Islands. I don't know how true it was, but there was nothing happening there.
Des comptables et des avocats de Londres sont arrivés en masse aux îles Caïmans, ainsi que dans d'autres dépendances britanniques. Ils ont commencé à les doter d'un ensemble de réglementations et de lois sur le secret bancaire. Le secret étant évidemment l'atout maître de ces juridictions, on leur a donné le nom de juridiction secrète.
What the Cayman Islands was doing was straightforwardly illegal activity. Drugs money was coming in huge quantities, tax evasion, whatever you wanted, you could have it.
La Banque d'Angleterre a observé les transactions qui se développaient à Londres et a noté dans un rapport du 11 avril 1969 marqué « Secret » « Nous devons nous assurer que la prolifération probable des sociétés fiduciaires, des banques et autres qui, pour la plupart, ne seront que des plaques de laiton manipulant des fonds en dehors de ces îles, ne deviennent pas incontrôlables. Nous ne faisons aucune objection au fait qu'elles fournissent des points d'ancrage pour les non-résidents, mais il est crucial que cette stratégie ne crée pas des opportunités pour le transfert de capitaux britanniques vers la zone hors sterling, non soumise à la réglementation britannique.
These small territories, the last remnants of the British Empire, which are still overseas territories today, they are still the last remnants of the British Empire. There are 14 of these overseas territories. 7 of them are bona fide tax havens, including the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands. Some of the biggest tax havens in the world today are still British.
Ayant accès à d'énormes capitaux, l'Euromarket a connu une expansion rapide, totalisant 500 milliards de dollars au début des années 80, puis 4,8 milliers de milliards en 1988, au point qu'en 1997, près de 90% de tous les prêts internationaux étaient conclus sur ce marché. L'Empire britannique avait bel et bien sombré, sans guère laisser de traces, mais la City de Londres, elle, s'est adaptée et a survécu. La City est le district financier de Londres et il présente des caractéristiques très particulières. Une cité dans la cité, un État dans l'État. La City est administrée par la Corporation de la City de Londres, une société privée qui s'arroge toutes les fonctions d'un conseil municipal et qui contrôle une police privée et des tribunaux privés.
Those of you who aren't from the UK, some of you even who are, might not be aware just how weird a thing the little city of London is within the big London. The City of London is a separate entity to the wider London, and it has its own head, the Lord Mayor, who's distinct from the Mayor, who runs the rest of London.
Chaque année en novembre, la City célèbre le défilé du Lord Mayor, la procession civile la plus ancienne dans le monde.
The City of London has long had this curious legal status because back in 1066, when William the Conqueror came over, the city was one of the only portions of England that he failed to conquer, and he struck a deal with the city in 1067 that allowed them to continue functioning.
De nos jours encore, la City n'est pas soumise à de nombreuses lois qui gouvernent le reste de la Grande-Bretagne. Son système politique trouve ses origines au Moyen Âge. Les électeurs de la City ne sont pas ses résidents, mais les sociétés privées qui opèrent dans la City. Son Lord Mayor est sélectionné parmi les maîtres des confréries médiévales.
They have a representative in the House of Commons called the Remembrancer. Apart from the clerks of the court of the House of Commons, he's the only unelected person there.
All other lobbyists have to stop, in the lobby. They're not allowed past the lobby.
Ce représentant permanent à la Chambre des communes a pour seul rôle de rendre compte à la corporation de la City des activités parlementaires et d'agir comme lobbyiste de la City.
The Corporation of London, clearly, it's a unique and interesting phenomenon that should have attracted many political scientists, political economists and economists. But I don't know of anyone who has studied systematically the Corporation of London and its impact on policy or economic policy. So we can only surmise. Some people assume or surmise that the Corporation of London is extremely powerful and is able in one way or another to shape British policy, particularly in financial matters.
Clement Attlee, the Prime Minister after the Second World War, had something to say about the City of London Corporation.
He did, yes. So over and over again, we have seen that there is in this country another power than that which has its seat at Westminster. The City of London, a convenient term for a collection of financial interests, is able to assert itself against the government of the country. Those who control money can pursue a policy at home and abroad, contrary to that which has been decided by the people.
La Banque d'Angleterre est au cœur de la City de Londres. Elle n'est pas seulement une banque centrale, elle est aussi le régulateur financier. Lorsque l'Empire s'est effondré, la Banque d'Angleterre a utilisé son pouvoir de régulateur afin d'attirer les banques du monde entier à Londres. En 1972, la Banque d'Angleterre a accordé une licence bancaire à la Banque du Crédit et du Commerce International, qui s'est empressée d'établir son siège social à Londres. 10 ans plus tard, cette BCCI était devenue la 7e plus grande banque dans le monde. 10 années plus tard, la BCCI était en faillite.
The deputy director of the CIA, Richard Kerr, said late today that the CIA did use BCCI to support CIA activities overseas.
Cependant, la BCCI n'a pas seulement collaboré avec tel ou tel service secret, elle s'est aussi embarquée dans la fraude financière à grande échelle, le blanchissement d'argent et le financement du terrorisme.
BCCI constituted international global crime of a level that boggles the mind.
BCCI was financing terrorism. The Bank of England knew it, says the report, but instead of supervising it properly, it tried to prevent the bank's collapse.
I am saying very directly that the Bank of England had sufficient information in front of it to close BCCI 15 months earlier than it did. Millions of depositors were hurt in that process.
De nombreux lanceurs d'alerte avaient contacté la Banque centrale. Et cependant, la Banque d'Angleterre n'a rien fait.
The Bank of England had plenty of time to intervene and investigate, but it did not do so because the tradition at that time, which still survives, is that, well, actually, you have to just kind of send hints and talk over lunch tables with the chaps regulating other chaps, and all would be well.
Robin Leigh Pemberton, le gouverneur de la Banque d'Angleterre, a déclaré au moment de la débâcle de la BCCI que le système actuel de supervision a bien servi notre communauté. Si nous devions fermer une banque chaque fois que nous identifions des cas de fraude, nous aurions beaucoup moins de banques que nous n'en avons en ce moment. Londres était donc un endroit où les banques pouvaient faire du business qui ailleurs n'aurait pas été autorisé et où les directeurs de banque n'avaient pas à s'inquiéter des conséquences de leurs actes. C'est une des raisons pour lesquelles aujourd'hui, il y a plus de banques à Londres que dans n'importe quelle autre place financière.
In Britain, nobody goes to jail. No bankers go to jail. They generally don't. They are a protected species. And that is part of the offshore business model of the UK, is to say, we will protect you, we will bring your money here, we will look after you. We're not going to put you in prison, we'll let you do what you want.
Une réglementation minimum était une façon d'attirer le business à Londres. Une autre était le secret bancaire. À partir des années 60, les institutions de la City ont commencé à créer des branches outre-mer dans les anciennes colonies de l'Empire britannique. Leur but était d'établir des centres offshore dotés de solides réglementations sur le secret financier afin d'y attirer les capitaux du monde entier.
Swiss banking secrecy is the most famous, the most well-known. You know, you put your money in a Swiss bank and they promise not to tell anybody, and that's one kind of secrecy. But another kind of secrecy, which is very British, is the trust. And the trust is a very slippery, complicated and devious mechanism. Trusts emerged, the legend has it, from the time of the Crusades, when the knights would go off and fight in foreign lands and they would leave their assets in the care of trusted stewards.
What trusts do ultimately is they play with the concept of ownership. Ownership is not such a simple thing. So the settlor, the knight in this case, would hand over the assets to someone who these days would be called a trustee. It's often a lawyer. Legally, you are separated from those assets. They're not yours anymore. There's a barrier. You can't be taxed on them. Nobody's going to find anything about your connection to these assets.
Dans les juridictions offshore britanniques, le fidéocommissaire n'a besoin d'aucun diplôme. N'importe qui peut créer une fiducie ou agir comme administrateur. Il n'existe pas de registre public des fiducies et aucune institution ne peut certifier qu'une fiducie a été créée.
The only persons who know about the creation of this agreement are the trustee and the settlor. There's no obligation to register it. There is no financial reporting obligation of trusts. They're not required to put annual statements onto account anywhere. So actually trusts are, to all intents and purposes, invisible arrangements.
John Christensen a été pendant 10 ans le conseiller économique des États de Jersey, une juridiction prônant le secret bancaire.
We're not talking about a few million. We're talking now about trillions. Trillions of dollars of capital, which apparently belong to nobody. For tax purposes and for other purposes, they belong to nobody. Everything, works of arts, gold bullion, racehorses, cars, real estate, not just financial assets, but a whole load of non-financial assets belong to these trusts, sitting there belonging to nobody. Now think that one through, because we are talking about maybe as much as $50 trillion of assets sitting offshore behind these instruments.
Well, the Cayman Islands are among several British overseas territories who have signed a new information exchange agreement with Britain and the rest of Europe to tackle tax evasion. The countries are now required to automatically provide details of the ownership of bank accounts and how they're used. Cayman became the first signatory last week.
It's important that the Cayman Islands should be recognised as the first overseas territory to sign such an agreement with the United Kingdom. And I think this importantly reflects the constructive approach that the Cayman Islands has taken in delivering our shared objective of rooting out tax evasion.
The trust lies at the core of the British secrecy model. They don't use banking secrecy. The Swiss use banking secrecy. The British, of course, are only too willing to kill off banking secrecy because they will then capture a larger market share. That's why the Brits are doing this.
La fiducie est une pièce maîtresse de l'édifice du secret financier anglo-saxon et forme la base sur laquelle des structures offshore complexes sont ensuite érigées. Chaque juridiction secrète offre un ensemble de services spécifiques, des trusts aux sociétés boîtes aux lettres, des comptes bancaires anonymes jusqu'aux gérants fictifs. La combinaison de ces services dans des structures complexes, opérant dans de multiples juridictions, permet la création de structures secrètes qui sont quasiment impossibles à pénétrer.
An offshore structure will often have a trust kind of sitting at the top of it. The trust will be here managing the assets, kind of controlling the assets. Underneath it, the trust will own some shell companies. Each one might be in a different jurisdiction. So you might have a trust in one jurisdiction whose trustees are somewhere else, whose beneficiaries are somewhere else, which owns offshore companies somewhere else. Each of these companies might then own assets, so that they might own, a bank account, a racehorse, a yacht, a painting, a portfolio of shares or whatever.
Il existe de nombreuses variations concernant les trusts et les structures offshore secrètes. Il y a aussi des avocats établis offshore dont le travail consiste essentiellement à créer des structures de plus en plus complexes et opaques. Le but de ces montages est de cacher l'identité des vrais propriétaires de ces biens offshore et de faciliter le recyclage de cette richesse sur les marchés financiers mondiaux.
But looking on the amount of money being administrated from tax havens, you see that it is a curve going like this. And all the talking we have been doing along with other wonderful people fighting against tax havens has not changed anything, It is the word where you say, go on talking, you're interesting me, and I'm going on doing what I want to do. We know everything today because we have had the Panama Papers, we have seen it, and we are not able to act upon it. And we are not able to act upon it because this system is really protecting the few people that are having benefit from it. And these are in percentage very few people, but they are powerful. And I see in the Panama committee that I'm sitting in, the only thing that could change this is to have a public accessible register of the beneficial ownership of trusts and of all kinds of companies. It is easy.
Les Panama Papers sont un ensemble de fuites provenant de Mossack Fonseca, un cabinet juridique offshore. Mossack Fonseca est le 4e plus grand cabinet juridique opérant offshore. Sur les 10 plus grands cabinets, 9 ont leur siège social dans des juridictions de l'outre-mer britannique. Lorsque des pays font des remontrances à la Grande-Bretagne à propos des activités illicites qui se multiplient dans ces paradis fiscaux, la Grande-Bretagne affirme que ces territoires sont indépendants et qu'elle ne peut pas intervenir.
I've heard time and time again from officials in Berlin and in Paris and in Washington and in other countries that they've been told by the British government that yes, they're well aware of what's going on in Jersey and they think it's very unfortunate, but they don't have the powers to intervene. Well, that's a straightforward lie. They do have the powers to intervene. They just choose not to.
Britain plays this kind of game of pretending, when it suits them, to pretend that these places are independent. At the end of the day, Britain appoints the governor, appoints lots of senior people in these places. They're responsible for foreign relations and defence, and also they can veto their legislation as well. So Britain has a massive degree of control. Basically, it is controlling these places, allowing them a little bit of political space.
Lorsqu'il était conseiller économique des États de Jersey, John Christensen venait très souvent à Londres pour des réunions avec les responsables des ministères britanniques.
As economic advisor, I had a lot of contact with different departments. Traditionally, UK governments have tried not to interfere in the domestic affairs of places like Jersey. So it happens in a more subtle sort of way. You kind of go and talk to someone, either at the Home Office or the Treasury, and they'd say, well, not actually particularly keen on this piece of legislation. It might be a good idea if you didn't go down that route. And over a cup of tea, that's quite a strong signal. That's a signal, go back to the island and say, they don't want you to do this.
le gouvernement britannique n'agit jamais publiquement, il exprime plutôt ses souhaits par le biais de discussions informelles. Il n'y a donc aucun suivi écrit ou déclaration officielle, car les discussions se déroulent à huis clos.
The relationship that these places have with London is very much about the British establishment and people understanding each other. I mean, anybody who is British or knows British people knows that communication between us is often very subtle, and you have to kind of know the codes when people say stuff. I mean, a lot of irony involved and a lot of kind of codified language of the British establishment that people kind of understand how it works. And I think that is very much the case with the British relationship with the tax havens. I think there's a lot of understanding of what we can and can't do without anyone having to actually spell it out.
En gardant ce pouvoir indirect, la Grande-Bretagne peut clamer haut et fort que ses juridictions sont politiquement autonomes.
Independence for Cayman is not on government's agenda. That's the message being sent to the UN Special Committee on Decolonization. Attorney Steve McPhail will be representing government at the UN meeting. The committee was set up to help colonies around the world on the road to independence. But Mr. McPhail says he'll be making it clear that Cayman is not ready for that transition.
And that message is that the Premier, his cabinet, his party has no mandate from the people of the Cayman Islands to seek independence. That is the message that I will be carrying.
Lorsque les Bahamas ont déclaré leur indépendance de la Grande-Bretagne en 1967, les banquiers offshore se sont réinstallés sur les îles Caïmans et ont continué à faire leurs affaires depuis cette nouvelle base. Cette connexion britannique, c'est ce qui a rassuré ces banquiers et leurs clients. Leur argent était à l'abri.
This British bedrock, that is what has allowed these places to become so trusted by the financial services industry and offshore finance and all these people.
En réalité, la plupart des capitaux qui sont domiciliés dans les paradis fiscaux britanniques sont gérés depuis Londres.
The City of London, by and large, likes to do its really dirty work outside London. There might, heaven forbid, be a regulator who actually takes the job seriously and starts to prosecute them for fraud in London. So better to do the frauds offshore in Gibraltar or Jersey, where there's much less risk that a serious prosecution will ever happen.
Les arrangements sont pour la plupart discutés et conclus à Londres même, mais ils sont domiciliés offshore pour des raisons fiscales, de transparence et de réglementation applicables.
What they allow the city to do is to get involved in dirty business, but then when the scandal hits, to say, well, they're kind of independent, there's nothing we can do about those places, that's not us, that's tax haven activity, and we're the city, you know, we're not involved in that kind of stuff. So it's an incredibly kind of convenient relationship.
The City of London has shaped the way in which Jersey, Guernsey and the British Overseas Territories have developed as tax havens. I see these places as the Frankensteins created by the City of London.
Le Royaume-Uni est aujourd'hui le plus grand fournisseur de services financiers internationaux.
The UK has an almost unique role in global finance. If you look at data, the kind of data that we've constructed in the Financial Secrecy Index, you can see the relative shares of each country in the global provision of financial services exports. That's financial services to non-residents. Now, there are two big centres and everything else is quite small in comparison.
Ces deux centres sont les États-Unis, avec environ 19% du marché mondial, et le Royaume-Uni, avec ses juridictions offshore, qui s'arrogent environ 25% de ce marché.
And if you add to that other jurisdictions, ex-colonies, but recently independent, fairly recently, by which I mean Hong Kong, Singapore, maybe even Dubai and Bahrain, and Cyprus, then you reach a figure of nearly 40%. And I think that figure represents better the position of London in the global financial market.
The soldiers left, the administrators left all the colonies, but they still kept a significant degree of control over the financial flows from these former parts of empire and the rest of the world. So you could describe it as a second empire, Britain's second empire, sort of hidden financial empire spanning large parts of the globe.
À l'époque du premier empire colonial, la City de Londres était le plus grand centre financier mondial. Non seulement les colonies, mais aussi les nations indépendantes géraient leurs affaires bancaires à Londres et utilisaient la monnaie de l'Empire pour leur commerce et leurs finances. Le déclin de l'Empire ayant entraîné celui de la City de Londres, la création de l'Euromarket de Londres a permis aux banques de la City de continuer à exploiter les réseaux de la période coloniale et leurs compétences acquises. La création de juridictions secrètes a offert aux banques un accès à des montants faramineux de capitaux faciles à accaparer. Les banques internationales du monde entier ont établi des branches à Londres et dans les juridictions offshore afin de profiter de ce nouveau système.
This system has taken the place of the occupation, up till 62. For France, I don't know for England, but about the same time, England were physically present in India, for instance, or in other colonies. And when you look at the money flows through the tax havens, they are increasing when we withdraw from the colonies. We are still plundering developing countries as former colonial powers.
Personnes fortunées, crimes organisés et grandes compagnies ont transféré leurs capitaux offshore en échange du secret et de la non-imposition. De plus, de nombreux pays se sont engagés sur la voie de la dérégulation et ont ouvert leurs économies, rendant encore plus facile le transfert massif de capitaux vers l'offshore. On en arrive aujourd'hui à ce que la moitié de la richesse offshore globale est vraisemblablement administrée par les juridictions secrètes britanniques. Un des grands perdants est l'Afrique, dont les capitaux fuient vers la toile d'araignée du nouvel empire britannique.
I think it's no coincidence that Britain's offshore empire emerged more or less at the same time as the collapse of the former empire.
We tend to think of Africa as being a huge net debtor to the rest of the world. But that was the extent of their debts at the end of 2008, 177 billion.
La dette des pays africains subsahariens s'élevait à 177 milliards de dollars en 2008. Pourtant, la richesse des élites de ces pays qui a fui offshore entre 1970 et 2008 est estimée à 944 milliards de dollars, soit 5 fois leur dette extérieure.
944 billion dollars. Do the maths. Far from being a net debtor, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is a net creditor to the rest of the world.
Avec leurs capitaux disparaissant offshore, les pays africains ont emprunté des fonds à taux élevés auprès des banques internationales. Avec le temps, ces dettes ont atteint des montants exorbitants qui ne pourront sans doute jamais être remboursés. Les juridictions secrètes ont privé les nations émergentes de leurs richesses et de leurs revenus fiscaux.
For a long time, a lot of developing countries, including recently Ecuador, have been trying to set up a UN tax body which is of a higher value than what is currently there, which is the UN Tax Committee. And every time this has happened, it has gotten blocked. During the financing for development process in Addis Ababa last year, I think it was the UK and the US that blocked attempts again to set up this World Tax Organization. So why would they not want to have democratic decision-making in global decisions on how tax gets collected across borders? I don't understand this. As long as we have cross-border activity that involves both criminal and legal activity, as long as we're unable to separate the two, this is going to continue to be a problem.
Les pays occidentaux bloquent les tentatives allant vers une plus grande transparence des flux financiers internationaux et à la mise en place de standards globaux pour la collecte de revenus fiscaux transfrontaliers. Pendant ce temps, les élites des pays émergents ont recours aux centres offshore pour y cacher leurs capitaux.
The oil from Gabon has not benefited people in Gabon. And this is true for the copper in Zambia, for the gold in Mozambique or in Mali. They have benefited the company that do extract it and their shareholders. It has benefited the corrupt elite in the country.
In developing countries, the offshore system of tax havens has facilitated the looting of these countries by their elites. It has enabled them to steal the money and keep it safe somewhere else.
Illicit financial flows, because the anonymity that drives them creates incentives for people in positions of power to be corrupt. This is why there's a group of countries where development progress is so difficult. It's that the incentives of individuals and the ability to pursue them through all the mechanisms that underpin illicit flows outweigh the type of mechanisms that lead you to a powerful, representative, effective state that can start to deliver development.
Globalement, les pays émergents perdent près de 1000 milliards de dollars chaque année en fuite de capitaux et évasion fiscale. La plupart des fonds atterrissent dans les plus grands pays occidentaux comme les États-Unis et la Grande-Bretagne, ce qui renforce les devises de ces deux pays au détriment des devises des pays émergents qui stagnent. Il convient de rappeler à ce stade que les flux illicites ont également eu une conséquence inattendue vers les pays occidentaux avec la financiarisation des économies américaines et britanniques. Les origines de cette financiarisation ou désindustrialisation remontent aux années 60.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. President Johnson, meanwhile, let it be known that the FBI is closely watching all anti-war activity.
Durant cette même décennie, l'économiste américain Michael Hudson travaillait à la Chase Manhattan Bank à Wall Street en tant qu'économiste chargé de la supervision de la balance des paiements.
During the 1960s, the United States balance of payments deficit was entirely a result of foreign military expenditures.
Les États-Unis émettaient des dollars à tour de bras afin de financer leur campagne militaire au Vietnam. Ils ont bien tenté d'empêcher les dollars finançant la guerre du Vietnam d'être déposés dans des banques étrangères.
The government asked Chase to set up a branch in Saigon during the Vietnam War. And as you can imagine, it didn't have windows. It was sort of a fortress. It lost money, but the government went to Chase because it said, if you don't get this money that's being thrown off by the military in Vietnam, then it's going to go into French banks. It'll get to General de Gaulle, and you know what he's going to do every month. He's going to cash it in for gold. That's what the United States was trying to stop.
Les États-Unis ne sont pas parvenus à stopper le flux de dollars et ont opté pour une stratégie différente. En 1967, Michael Hudson a reçu un mémo d'un ancien fonctionnaire du ministère des Affaires étrangères.
In 1967, I was given by a former State Department employee in the elevator at Chase Manhattan a memo from the State Department urging that Chase Manhattan would take the lead in helping the United States become the Switzerland of the world, meaning the flight capital. The State Department, through Chase, asked me to estimate how much money do you think is available if America were to become the new Switzerland, and how do we do it? The plan was to organize offshore banking centers in the Caribbean and elsewhere, and the hot money wouldn't come directly into Chase because that wouldn't be nice and very legal. What happened was that the Latin American criminals, other criminals, drug dealers, all sorts of organized crime, would put their money in the offshore Caribbean banks, and these offshore banks would then deposit the inflow in the head office.
En retransférant ainsi ces euro-dollars aux États-Unis, le Trésor américain pouvait réduire les sorties de dollars et soutenir le cours de sa devise.
Every country looks to its foreign exchange rate. And the foreign exchange rate is not only imports and exports, it's capital movements. And if you look at the International Monetary Fund's monthly international financial statistics, you have sort of a steady balance of trade, a steady immigrants' remittances. What goes up and down are called errors and omissions. What the United Nations and the IMF call errors and omissions are flight capital. It's the reason that it's omitted is they don't like to really look at this. In the 1930s, Roy Ovid Hall, economist for the U.S. Commerce Department, wanted to include criminal movements in the balance of payment statistics. And Congress got very upset. I was told in Washington, the argument was, we're a Christian country. We don't want to report crime. It's just, don't look at it. And they forbid him to include criminal money in the balance of payments. I guess now you call it errors and omissions. You don't call it criminal inflow and outflow.
Dans les années 60 et 70, la Grande-Bretagne s'est retrouvée confrontée à un dilemme semblable à celui des États-Unis. Les sorties de capitaux importantes faisaient baisser la livre sterling. La Grande-Bretagne a réalisé que la valeur de sa devise pouvait aussi être soutenue en ouvrant son marché domestique à ces milliers de milliards de dollars qui transitaient dans ces paradis fiscaux. Mais, tout comme pour les États-Unis, cette politique a une conséquence adverse inattendue.
The British banks today, just as in the 19th century, don't put their money into British manufacturing. They put their money into real estate speculation, into financial speculation, foreign currency trade. So the financialization of London has helped deindustrialize the country because it's enabled sterling to be supported by this huge inflow of hot money, this inflow of drug dealing money and criminal money and tax evasion money all over the world that is going to London instead of going to Switzerland, Liechtenstein or the Caribbean.
Avec l'approbation tacite des États-Unis, les paradis fiscaux britanniques ont connu une expansion rapide et très vite, le système offshore est devenu le marché financier international prédominant. Peu de gens réalisent comment ce marché fonctionne. En 1986, l'économiste John Christensen s'est installé offshore afin de mener son enquête. Il a postulé pour la filiale de Jersey d'un des grands cabinets comptables mondiaux.
At Deloitte & Touche, I was working in what's called company and trust administration, straightforward offshore stuff. I went offshore specifically to work in that area because that's where you're dealing with the offshore companies, the shell companies, the offshore trusts, and you're administering them. That way I could see from working inside a big global accounting firm exactly what the clients were doing. I had complete access to all the client files. And over the course of my period of working with Deloitte & Touche, I investigated over 100 of their clients offshore, and this is what I found. There were some insider traders, some market rigging, some avoiding disclosure of conflicts of interest, illicit arms trading, illicit political campaign donations, contract kickbacks, bribery, fraudulent invoicing, trade mispricing, and at the bottom, tax evasion. Okay? This is what the clients were doing. On the basis of a sample of the clients that I looked at, not a single client was involved in what I would regard as genuinely legitimate activity. They were all involved in some kind of tax dodging or worse.
I met with Carl Levin. He used to be an American senator, and he made a lot of inquiries into private banking, asking questions to the bankers. What do you think the percentage is among your clients that are using these companies for legitimate purposes? And the answer was, I believe that 99.9% of my clients are using these companies for illicit purposes. This is a reality. This is American bankers telling what they are doing. And it's exactly the same thing with UK bankers helping their clients to have accounts in Panama or in Bermuda or in Cayman Islands.
Les juridictions secrètes sont largement utilisées pour des activités financières frauduleuses et douteuses, où le secret est non seulement un atout, mais aussi une nécessité. Une activité financière légale n'a nul besoin du secret que les paradis fiscaux proposent, ni aucun désir de payer les honoraires élevés que les banques offshore et les cabinets juridiques prélèvent. De nos jours, environ la moitié de ces juridictions sont des dépendances britanniques. Officiellement, elles proclament qu'elles sont transparentes et que leur secteur de services financiers ne poursuivent que des activités financières légitimes.
Our economy is not based on secrecy. It's based on transparency. It's based on a sound regulatory environment. It's based on good governance and good government with a British government legal system. That's what our financial institutions are based on.
Well, tonight we have a response from the head of Cayman Finance after a group of U.S.-based anti-tax evasion activists announced plans to travel to Cayman to draw attention to what they feel is corporate tax evasion. Finance Chairman Mr. Richard Cole says he's encouraging the group to visit and says our financial sector has nothing to hide.
I would say if anybody wants to come to Cayman to find out what's coming, you know, what we do here, come on down. We have no secrets here.
When I went to the Cayman Islands back in 2008, I think it was, I called the government spokesman and he said, OK, we have had an order from on high that nobody is allowed to speak to you. You are off limits.
En 2011, le journaliste Nicholas Shaxson a publié Îles au Trésor, un ouvrage choc sur le système offshore.
The author of a series of international media reports says he would welcome a debate with Cayman Finance Chair Tony Travers. Mr. Travers recently called Nicholas Shaxson an imbecile with the understanding of an 11-year-old.
There are always going to be the politics of envy. Now, the politics of envy are exacerbated by imbeciles who don't actually understand what's going on in the Cayman Islands. I don't know what he's talking about. And furthermore, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Les îles Caïmans sont le 5e plus grand centre financier au monde. Elles abritent 80 000 sociétés immatriculées, plus de 3/4 des fonds spéculatifs du monde entier et 1,9 millier de milliards en compte de dépôt. 60 000 personnes résident aux îles Caïmans, en gros l'équivalent de la population des sans-abri à New York. Un mélange surprenant d'individus compose le monde offshore. Des anciens élèves d'écoles privées britanniques, des membres des services secrets du monde entier, des criminels internationaux et toute une galerie de lords et ladies et de banquiers. Vu l'enjeu énorme pour tous ces individus riches et puissants, il n'est pas surprenant que les paradis fiscaux britanniques aient développé des techniques inédites de leur crue pour empêcher la publication d'informations compromettantes.
For many people who work offshore and who don't like what they're doing, it's very hard indeed to dissent because they will be attacked personally with a degree of viciousness which is quite extraordinary. Most of the time, the instruments of suppression are relatively sophisticated. You won't get promotion by doing this, or your family won't like it.
It's not generally, let's slam them in prison. That's far too crude. We are talking about very substantially, you know, the establishment, the British establishment in these cases. The mechanisms are very, very subtle. Sort of ostracism is one way of doing it. These peculiar mechanisms for, you know, if someone tries to blow the whistle, you find all sorts of methods that aren't the most, you know, just fire them, you give them far too much work to do, you steer them in a different direction.
Quelqu'un qui connaît de très près cette méthode offshore pour faire taire les gens, c'est Stuart Sivray, ancien sénateur et ministre de la Santé de Jersey. En 2009, il a fait fuiter un rapport sur les agissements d'un infirmier voyou suspecté d'avoir tué des patients à l'hôpital de Jersey.
It all came to a head during a state's debate on Tuesday, the 10th of March. Senator Stuart Sivray brought the sitting to a standstill, claiming Senator Jimmy Pershard had sworn at him and told him to go and top himself. Senator Pershard denied the claim, saying, "I absolutely refute that." But less than a week later, he was forced to admit he'd lied. Senator Persaud has now admitted that on another occasion he did tell Senator Stuart Sivray to go and do everyone a favour and slit his wrists.
I was arrested at my house one morning by 6 plainclothes police officers. There were another 2 specialist data search police officers on hand, and also another 2 police officers in full body armour, one of those battering rams they kind of use in drugs raids. So 10 police officers descended on me without a search warrant. The property was turned over from top to bottom. All of the computers were seized and searched. All kinds of private constituency data was stolen by the police.
Peu de temps après que nous avons commencé à filmer, un officier de police est sorti du commissariat et a commencé à gesticuler devant la caméra. Cet officier s'est alors empressé de tester les sirènes de sa moto durant le reste de cette interview.
When it came to prosecuting me, when the authorities were prosecuting me, I claimed that this was a legitimate public interest disclosure defence. And I, with an expert witness, was able to produce a set of reports that effectively destroyed the prosecution case.
Stuart Sivray a été poursuivi au terme de la loi sur la protection des données. En réaction, les magistrats ont jugé que l'argument de défense de Stuart Sivray, la publication d'un rapport au nom de l'intérêt public, ne serait plus admissible. Et les poursuites judiciaires ont repris de plus belle, en l'absence de la défense. Ces 7 dernières années, Stuart Sivray a dû faire face à plusieurs comparutions et a été incarcéré à 3 reprises. Il ne sait pas quand et si cette persécution va cesser. Pas plus qu'il ne sait s'il se retrouvera une fois encore derrière les barreaux.
To look at Jersey from the outside, it looks like it's got a prosecution system, it looks like it's got a court and a legislature, but none of it's real. It's a Potemkin village. None of these systems in Jersey meet the tests of being objective or actually functioning properly.
The experience that Stuart Sivray had is, he's perhaps at the blunter end of the scale. He was simply suppressed and taken to court on trumped-up charges.
Let's carry on pretending to do the interview. They might get bored. This is the kind of how oppression happens in Jersey. You see, all kinds of little things get done to harass people. Even they don't often go to the kind of extremes that they did against me in terms of actually arresting me and putting me in prison. But the authorities use all kinds of other lesser little methods to interfere with people, kind of sabotage things, obstruct people, make life difficult for people. If you annoy the establishment in Jersey, you won't get a job here. Your children won't get decent jobs. That's kind of how it works.
I went to Jersey in March 2009 with Nick Shaxson. About 24 hours after we arrived in Jersey, we were there for several days. Nick said, have you noticed that we're being followed? Ever since we arrived at the airport, we've been followed. He said, don't look now, but we're being followed now. Turns out he was quite correct. We were being followed. And I found that very disturbing indeed.
On vous dira souvent à Jersey, si vous n'aimez pas nos traditions, vous pouvez toujours prendre un bateau demain matin. La brochure promotionnelle Jersey Finance affirme que Jersey représente une extension de la City de Londres.
It's where the City of London chooses to do many of the activities which they couldn't do in London itself.
We're here just to talk about this one company called Appleby. I'll just read what they say on their website. Members of the firm, Appleby, have gone on not only to political office, but also in a number of centres, Bermuda, Jersey, the Isle of Man and the Cayman Islands, to senior judicial office. So essentially, they're boasting of the fact that their staff and their partners have a real interchange between the people that are in power in these offshore financial centres.
Les mêmes avocats et comptables qui créent et gèrent les trusts offshore occupent aussi des fonctions politiques de haut rang. Dans le monde offshore sous pavillon britannique, la plupart des hommes politiques sont dans les affaires. Ils font du lobbying et la promotion de leurs intérêts professionnels. Ils élaborent, améliorent et votent les lois. Les hommes politiques sont membres des directoires des sociétés qu'ils sont supposés réguler.
There is no place for dirty money in Britain. Indeed, there should be no place for dirty money anywhere. The challenge I'm laying down for every country today is to root out the rot of corruption, to ensure transparency over what your own companies are doing, require transparency for foreign companies in your country too, and work with us to spread this approach to transparency around the world.
En public, les milieux politiques britanniques affirment qu'ils s'attaquent aux juridictions secrètes et à la corruption, mais en pratique, ils font l'inverse.
When I talk to politicians in Brussels, they say that they've had more lobbyists from London, and including politicians, come to them to protect the City of London's interests than they've had from every other European member state combined, which gives you some idea of the extent to which British politicians see themselves as essentially lobbyists for the City of London.
We begin with our big story. Cayman's efforts to ensure transparency in its financial services sector is being recognised by the international community. Earlier this week, the UK's Prime Minister David Cameron told Parliament that the tax haven label placed on its crown dependencies and overseas territories is unfair.
De nombreux politiciens britanniques ont des relations personnelles et d'affaires avec la City de Londres et les juridictions secrètes battant pavillon britannique. Le père de David Cameron, Ian Cameron, était un professionnel des capitaux offshore. Il a travaillé dans ce secteur à partir des années 80.
At this courthouse behind me here in St Helier, we found this. It's a document called a grant of probate, and it's attached to the English will of none other than Ian Cameron, David Cameron's father.
Say hello to Mum and Dad. Hi, Bar, how are you? Good to see you.
Ian Cameron was certainly a wealthy man. In 2009, his personal fortune was estimated by researchers for the Sunday Times Rich List at £10 million. Yet when Ian Cameron died in 2010, his estate was much smaller than might be expected, just £2.7 million.
In many cases, it's the politicians and their cronies and their families and so on, and the business people who sponsor the political parties who are using these offshore services themselves. So they've got no personal interest in closing it down. If they wanted to close it down, they could do it tomorrow. The fact of the matter is they don't want to do it because they themselves are complicit with the process.
If you come from the same kind of background, you know the right people, then all the kind of legal niceties will often fall away. You can get away with doing all sorts of things that they wouldn't just let any old person, you know, if you came knocking on the door saying, can you set up an offshore company to do this, they'd tell you to get lost. But if you're part of the networks, you can do these kinds of things. So that's a very important part of the whole system. Upper class British public school kind of establishment that has been there since, you know, for centuries.
L'establishment britannique, repère d'élites privilégiées issues du même monde, s'est taillé une niche sur mesure et très lucrative dans le monde offshore au sortir de l'effondrement de l'empire colonial. Ces élites sont parvenues à quitter leur robe d'administrateurs d'empire pour endosser celle de gérants financiers de l'élite mondiale et des sociétés multinationales. Au fur et à mesure que les capitaux ont afflué offshore, l'impact des activités de ces centres financiers a commencé à se faire sentir dans tous les pays.
The reality is not what you believe, that your prime minister has the power to decide on the future of your country. The power is hidden here.
We have country after country around the world where the lack of financial transparency about taxation, about ownership, about corruption has undermined the extent to which governments deliver representative policymaking for their citizens. You know, we have extreme cases like the hiding of tax evasion by people in finance ministries in Greece, in France. But we also have this system that in general is geared towards anonymous company ownership, the anonymous ownership of properties across London, of half of the land in Scotland. You know, do we really think there's any circumstances in which governments work better, in which markets work better, in which the distribution of income and assets is better when we allow so much to be hidden? Who wants to not know who you're doing business with? Who wants their government to have people working for it, or to be led by people whose assets are hidden, whose financial transactions are conducted anonymously offshore? You know, this is a bad direction for the world.
We need the citizens to understand what is happening, that they are the ones who is carrying the burden, and that some individuals having the power are exonerating themselves. Ordinary people are paying taxes, rich people are not. So this is inequality, and it is leading up to populism, because it shows so clearly that the people today leading the world are not able to take care of the interest of ordinary people.
Back in the 60s and 70s, you know, tax evasion or pushing back against taxation, it was kind of seen as anti-establishment. So, you know, the Rolling Stones and Phil Collins, all these people kind of going offshore, going away. It was seen as a sort of rebellious thing to do. And if you fast forward to the present day, now that is the establishment. The offshore system is the establishment.
À l'heure actuelle, l'offshore est le conduit par lequel les élites et les multinationales mènent leurs affaires. L'évasion fiscale est à la base des affaires.
This kind of sophisticated cheating requires a huge infrastructure. We like to talk about the pinstripe infrastructure of highly educated people who think it is their right to help others to cheat societies.
We have a new mafia in town. It does not actually shoot people, does not put bullets in their kneecaps, but its trade is just as deadly. It deprives people of opportunities to have healthcare, education, security, justice, and essentially a fulfilling life.
Les comptables sont la colonne vertébrale du système offshore. Ils gèrent des structures qui permettent aux individus et aux grandes sociétés de transférer leurs avoirs offshore et d'éluder l'impôt.
There are about 2.5 million professionally qualified accountants on this planet. About 330,000 are in the UK.
Well-known people, well-dressed, well-fed, highly paid, are sitting in city centre offices, and they are paid to dream up tax avoidance schemes for individuals and for corporations.
We can all elect a government which says, vote for us, we will give you better healthcare, better education, better security. And next day accountant says, sorry about that folks, you elected this government, but we actually got a tax avoidance scheme, and the Amazons and the Googles and Microsofts won't be paying any taxes in your jurisdiction. Too bad, you voted for it, but actually you're going to get something else.
So it's a crazy world that part of the business model at big accountancy firms is how to deny public the services by erosion of tax revenues. And these firms are then rewarded with government-funded contracts, and the same firms are then advising local governments and the central governments, and the same firms then report on the company accounts and tell us all is well.
When I argue this with a Pricewaterhouse partner in a face-to-face debate, he said, Professor Sikkar, you never give us credit for anything. We generate millions of dollars of revenues, and we have lots and lots of satisfied clients. What is your problem? And my response was very simple, that's the language of drug pushers and pimps.
En Grande-Bretagne, une nouvelle race de hauts fonctionnaires est parvenue au sommet. Parmi ces fonctionnaires, Dave Hartnett, qui a pris la direction de HMRC, le fisc britannique. Dave Hartnett a introduit une nouvelle technique de collecte d'impôts. Des deals ou accords seraient conclus avec chaque contribuable, et ce en privé. Concernant les contribuables importants, Dave Hartnett a fréquemment conduit en personne les négociations. British Telecom a été une des premières grandes sociétés à bénéficier de cette nouveauté et a reçu une ristourne de plus d'1 milliard de livres. Ben Verwaayen, PDG de British Telecom, a alors écrit « Les gains sur le cours de l'action sont en hausse de 14% et nous sommes ravis d'avoir reçu un crédit de 1 milliard du percepteur. » Dave Hartnett a invoqué le fait que cette technique était des plus efficaces.
Litigation in the courts is really phenomenally expensive in this day and age all over the world, and I think it's to be avoided where possible. And the art is to persuade people to pay by strength of argument and the like.
Après des manifestations monstres en 2011, le comité chargé du Trésor public a convoqué Dave Hartnett. Il a affirmé qu'il ne lui était pas possible de divulguer des informations du fait du principe de confidentialité dû aux contribuables.
What in statute prevents you from disclosing information to Parliament?
All my advice, Mr. Barclay, so far has been that I am prevented, and my colleagues are prevented, by the Act and by the decision of the Commissioners.
Dave Hartnett a omis de dire que l'avis juridique qu'il avait reçu affirmait que la divulgation d'informations était à la discrétion du directeur de HMRC. Or, le directeur de HMRC était Dave Hartnett lui-même.
Just like the mafia has penetrated the state, accountancy firms have also penetrated the state. The head of anti-avoidance in the UK tax authority is from one of these firms. The newly appointed chairman of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which is a tax authority, is a partner from KPMG. Their partners have penetrated the state. They are running the treasury.
Ainsi donc, l'industrie des services financiers britanniques a-t-elle pris le pouvoir et commencé à façonner les lois à son avantage?
The degree of political capture by the City of London, by the big banks and the big law firms, is so enormous that the politicians have effectively become their spokespersons.
Avec un gouvernement qui n'a aucune intention d'agir pour le bien public, un groupe de manifestants a interpellé Dave Hartnett lors d'une soirée privée qui se tenait à Oxford.
Hi everybody, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to take a few moments of your time. Here tonight to present Dave with an award. It is the Lifetime Achievement Award for services to corporate tax planning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dave's been a great friend to the industry, a great friend to many of us over the years, and really we just can't thank him enough for what he's done.
Obviously us at Vodafone, it saved us billions off our tax bill, and our friends at Goldman Sachs as well, we've also saved us millions
25 million or so.
These people are trespassers and intruders.
And I know you've had problems with pesky
This is an unlawful conspiracy to trespass, and you will go, sir. You will depart immediately before we set the dogs on you. Go. You're trespassing.
So sorry. Please
You are trespassing, scum. Go.
Après son départ en retraite, Dave Hartnett est retourné dans le secteur privé et une des positions qu'il a occupées était au cabinet comptable Deloitte, où il conseillait les gouvernements étrangers sur l'imposition des sociétés. Dave Hartnett est un compagnon de l'Ordre du Bain, un honneur qui lui a été remis par le monarque anglais.
We have former ministers acting as advisors to accountancy firms. Accountancy firms provide jobs and consultancies for potential ministers. To my mind, really, it's an indication of corrupt structures. People are buying and selling influences. When a former minister works for an accountancy firm, he's not providing any accounting knowledge, he's opening political opportunities, home and abroad. That is what they are doing.
I hope by now you'll share my view that I don't trust most bankers, I don't trust most lawyers, I don't trust most accounting firms. I actually think they're engaged in a conspiracy against public interest.
En Grande-Bretagne, le secret et la complexité de la machine financière et gouvernementale contribuent à rendre invisible la corruption dans le service public. Les structures financières sont souvent si compliquées que même après qu'elles sont révélées au grand jour, on ne les identifie pas toujours pour ce qu'elles sont. Un exemple évident est le PFI, ou Initiative de Finances Privées.
PFI is Private Finance Initiative. It is a way of funding public infrastructure, things like hospitals, schools, roads and bridges, but financing them via the private sector rather than the historical method, which is via central government. Over a period of 30 or 40 years, the amount of kind of repayment costs will be sort of 3 or 4 times higher overall than if you borrowed it from central government in the first place. So it's basically a giant accounting scam. Once the PFI policy has been set up, you find that the Big Four accountancy firms were actually paid members of staff within the Treasury Department who were then actually going around and selling and advising upon the implementation of PFI contracts by public authorities.
Effectively saying, come to us and we will show you how to derive the most benefit from it. In other words, how to perhaps exploit the legislation.
Even the offices of the State Tax Authority are now owned offshore. HMRC, which is the tax collector here in the UK, their offices are owned in Bermuda by a company called Mapley Steps. It's quite incredible.
La société qui détient le contrat de gérance du siège de HMRC a emprunté des fonds auprès des investisseurs offshore à un taux d'intérêt de 15%. Du fait que ce taux était exorbitant, la société affichait des pertes et donc n'était pas imposable. En 2011, HMRC n'a pas été en mesure de prouver que des sociétés de type PFI payaient des impôts au fisc britannique.
I think we need to have a serious conversation about the role of government in this whole debacle and how much our government has been penetrated by big banks and accountancy firms and ultimately in whose interest it operates. The reason we were protesting outside the Africa PPP conference is that we wanted to make sure that citizens back in Africa should hear about the fact that such policies have been a complete failure here in the UK. We know that these products are not being marketed to African countries in their own best interests. Their only motivation is to spread the reach of financial services into new markets. It's all being promoted in the interest of the City of London. What you're seeing is basically a second form of colonialisation. You've had initially occupation, resource extraction, and through that process, countries like Britain, which have had a large offshore empire, have developed significant networks, and now those networks are being used to promote and exploit financial services.
La City de Londres était le cœur financier battant de l'Empire britannique. Mais lorsque l'Empire a périclité, la City s'est transformée, passant de plaque tournante pour les transactions financières de l'Empire à un rôle de centre financier global. D'anciens comptoirs sans grande valeur pour l'Empire sont devenus les fils de la toile d'araignée des juridictions secrètes offshore. Ces juridictions ont capturé des fortunes du monde entier pour les transférer à la City de Londres. Aujourd'hui, 25% des opérations de la finance internationale sont menées sur un territoire britannique. environ la moitié des juridictions secrètes existantes, actuellement, arborent le pavillon britannique, et près de la moitié des richesses mondiales seraient à l'abri dans des paradis fiscaux britanniques. Ce sont ces services financiers qui enrichissent les élites britanniques et qui permettent à d'anciens ministres et hauts fonctionnaires, ainsi qu'à des espions de MI5 et MI6 en retraite, d'être récompensés de leurs loyaux services par des jobs de consultants très lucratifs. Tous ces gens ont fait de la Grande-Bretagne et de ses dépendances le plus important paradis fiscal au monde, qui opère au détriment de l'ensemble des pays de la planète et a transformé la Grande-Bretagne en un pays qui ne sert que les intérêts de sa classe dirigeante.